The year 1939 marked a period of intense crisis, a desperate rush to rapidly arm Britain for the global conflict that was already beginning to engulf Europe. The Bristol Aeroplane Company's Beaufighter was not a revolutionary design but rather a pragmatic solution born of engineering necessity and urgency. It began life as a private venture, essentially a heavy fighter variant of the earlier, less successful Beaufort torpedo bomber, utilizing many of its existing wing and fuselage components. This clever and economical commonality with its predecessor allowed the new heavy fighter to progress rapidly through development and swiftly into the crucial early stages of operational service. Its design was inherently rugged, prioritizing endurance and the capacity to carry a formidable armament over the high-speed elegance of its fighter contemporaries. The aircraft's appearance was undeniably bulky and utilitarian, a twin-engine beast built for stability and punishing work rather than swirling aerial duels. Initial assessments from many observers and test pilots were often critical of its maneuverability, suggesting it was too large and too slow to effectively challenge the nimble Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs. The Beaufighter's primary role was first envisioned as a long-range fighter and a dependable night interceptor, a reliable platform to guard the British Isles against the incoming nighttime raids. Its cockpit was more like a tough, functional workshop than a streamlined racing machine, designed for the long, grim hours of patrol and combat. It possessed none of the immediate, public glamour of the Spitfire, yet its unassuming qualities concealed a potential for destruction that no other aircraft of the time could match. The early skepticism focused too much on speed and agility, entirely missing the point that the Beaufighter was a platform for an unprecedented amount of firepower. This aircraft was deliberately engineered not to chase lightweight fighters but to deliver a crippling payload with precision and to absorb significant battle damage. The airframe was robust enough to handle early, heavy, and complex radar sets, making it perfectly suited for the blackout conditions of the night war. This blend of high load carrying capacity and solid construction would soon shift its destiny from a purely defensive shield to a devastating offensive weapon. The initial doubts were ultimately silenced by the undeniable force of its continuous, brutal, and long-lasting operational success in multiple theaters. It represented a triumph of pragmatic, focused engineering, providing a stable, powerful engine for both advanced technology and sheer, overwhelming firepower. The world was about to learn that this forgotten workhorse was capable of delivering a punch that could fundamentally alter the strategic balance of power at sea. In the opening stages of the Second World War, the German Luftwaffe maintained a potent psychological and technical advantage, fostering an almost arrogant culture among its fighter elite. Their primary mounts, the sleek Messerschmitt Bf 109 and the powerful Focke-Wulf Fw 190, symbolized this unquestioned aerial dominance and technical superiority. When the heavy, twin-engine Beaufighter began to appear in the operational skies, German fighter aces expressed considerable professional disdain and often outright mockery. They quickly gave the ungainly aircraft derogatory nicknames, derisively calling it the box or, more chillingly, the coffin, believing its poor speed and perceived clumsiness made it an easy target. This dismissive attitude was based purely on the traditional metrics of air combat, turn rate, ceiling, and maximum velocity, all areas where the Beaufighter was indeed outclassed by the German single-engine fighters. Luftwaffe intelligence made a fundamental error by initially focusing exclusively on its night fighter role, completely underestimating the potential for its powerful offensive strike missions. The attention of the top German pilots was firmly fixed on the Spitfire and Hurricane, the aircraft that directly challenged their control over the daytime European skies. This failure to take the Beaufighter seriously proved to be a significant strategic and intelligence oversight that would cost the Axis powers dearly in lost ships and vital cargo. Veteran aces, seasoned by victories in the Battle of Britain and over the Eastern Front, were supremely confident that any heavy Allied aircraft could be dispatched quickly. They regarded the Beaufighter as an obsolete design concept, viewing it as a desperate, stopgap measure by the Royal Air Force to manage its immediate aircraft shortages. Their initial aerial encounters with the Beaufighter often reinforced this arrogant view, as the British pilots learned harsh, early lessons about the aircraft's defensive vulnerabilities against determined, high-energy attack tactics. This misplaced confidence, born of earlier, easy victories, established a critical and dangerous complacency towards an aircraft whose true, brutal purpose was yet to be fully revealed to them. The German pilots simply could not fathom a design philosophy that favored a massive, stable gun platform over the elegant, high-speed finesse they valued. Their ridicule was a profound and fatal misjudgment of the aircraft's true capabilities as a low-level, high-endurance weapon of naval destruction. The box was not designed to outturn them in a dogfight, but rather to fly through their concentrated fire and deliver a devastating punch that no merchant ship could survive. The defining characteristic of the Beaufighter, the aspect that elevated it from an adequate fighter to a legendary strike aircraft, was its truly unparalleled concentration of forward-firing firepower. For massive 20mm Hispano cannon were rigidly mounted in the lower fuselage, perfectly aligned to ensure a single, devastating point of impact over a short distance. This quartet of heavy-hitting weapons was often supplemented by up to 6.303 Browning machine guns fixed in the wings, creating an annihilating stream of projectiles. This 10-gun battery generated a torrent of fire that was capable of instantly tearing apart the lightly armored structure of any contemporary aircraft in a single, short burst. Crucially, this immense and focused kinetic energy was equally, if not more, effective against the tougher steel hulls and decks of merchant and naval vessels. The high-explosive and armor-piercing shells from the 20mm cannons could penetrate bridge structures, shred reinforced deck houses, and even pierce the vital boiler rooms of medium-sized freighters. When the Beaufighter's mission focus decisively shifted to the anti-shipping role, this cannon configuration became the signature of the Coastal Command's newly found aggression. It was not merely the large caliber of the guns, but the sheer, focused volume of destructive rounds that could be delivered instantaneously during a low-altitude, high-speed attack run. The Beaufighter's stable, heavy airframe provided an exceptional firing platform, significantly minimizing the typical dispersion of its shells and ensuring a high rate of hits. This inherent stability under fire allowed the pilots to press their attacks to extremely close range, maximizing the destructive effect of their potent ammunition. The ability to absorb and, more importantly, to deliver a truly staggering amount of punishment was exactly what was required to overcome the heavy, coordinated defensive fire of a well-protected German convoy. This weapon system transformed the aircraft from a competent night fighter into the most feared maritime strike asset in the entire Allied arsenal. The Germans would soon rename the aircraft from the Box to Der Sarg, or the Coffin, a chilling and more accurate reflection of its absolutely lethal maritime efficiency. This raw, brutal power was the ultimate equalizer, fundamentally negating the Beaufighter's perceived limitations in speed and maneuverability against high-performance Luftwaffe interceptors. The strategic concept of the strike wing represents one of the most effective and revolutionary tactical innovations of the entire Second World War air campaign. It was a doctrine conceived and implemented specifically to maximize the devastating destructive potential of the Beaufighter against Axis maritime commerce. Prior to this innovation, anti-shipping operations were often conducted by small, isolated flights of aircraft, which frequently lacked the necessary concentrated force to overcome well-laid enemy defenses. The strike-wing doctrine aggregated multiple squadrons under a single, unified command, allowing for the coordination of various distinct elements into one overwhelming, synchronized assault force. A typical operation involved several different groups of Beaufighters, each assigned a specialized, non-overlapping role within the larger attack structure. One element, often equipped with powerful rockets or heavy torpedoes, would constitute the main attack force, primarily targeting the slow, vital merchant ships. A second, crucial group, typically armed with cannons and rockets, would fly as for flak suppression, tasked with violently and immediately silencing the anti-aircraft guns on the enemy escorts. A third element, consisting of high-altitude Beaufighters or accompanying Spitfires, provided essential top cover to fend off any attempted interception by patrolling Luftwaffe fighters. This synchronized, multi-layered approach proved to be devastatingly effective, completely saturating the enemy's defensive capacity and preventing them from responding to all threats simultaneously. The sheer number of aircraft descending upon a convoy at mast height often generated a scene of pure, unmanageable chaos, a lethal distraction that allowed the strike aircraft to press home their attack successfully. Coastal Command meticulously perfected this overwhelming tactic in the challenging environments of the North Sea and along the rocky, contested coasts of both Norway and France. German convoys, which had relied on the close protection of land-based air support, now found themselves facing a far more coordinated and overwhelming threat from the sea. The strike wing transformed the Beaufighter from a mere aircraft into the central, key weapon within a highly effective and dynamically coordinated combined arms system. This systematic and well-rehearsed attack philosophy ensured that the Beaufighter, regardless of its known weaknesses, became an absolute and undeniable terror to German war logistics. The concentration of force meant that very few convoys, once engaged by a strike wing, were able to escape the encounter without crippling losses to their valuable shipping. The vast, often tempestuous, and perpetually frigid expanse of the North Sea quickly became the premier hunting ground for the newly operational Beaufighter strike wings. German convoys were constantly transporting essential strategic materials, including vital iron ore from neutral Sweden and raw goods from their occupied territories. These convoys were forced to navigate a truly deadly gauntlet, hugging the coastlines of Norway and the Low Countries for the limited protection of land-based radar and fighter bases. However, the impressive long-range capability of the Beaufighter allowed it to penetrate deeply into these heavily protected waters, striking far from the conventional safety of its British home airfields. The environment itself presented an equal and dangerous adversary, with sudden, blinding squalls, poor visibility, and massive, unpredictable swells complicating the perilous low-level flying. Pilots were forced to expertly skim the waves, often just mere feet above the freezing, dark water, a necessity for remaining beneath the enemy radar horizon and ensuring the element of surprise. The attacks were defined by the sudden, violent emergence of the aircraft from a cloud bank or the thick coastal mist, giving the unsuspecting convoy crews only scant seconds of warning. The psychological impact of these unexpected, violent ambushes was profound, deeply demoralizing the German sailors who felt constantly exposed and hopelessly vulnerable. The highly armed escort vessels, bristling with heavy anti-aircraft guns, were invariably the primary targets for the specialized flak suppression Beaufighters. Silencing these escort vessels was deemed absolutely critical to the overall success of the larger strike, ensuring the vulnerable merchant ships could be attacked unhindered. Navigating the deep, twisting fjords of Norway, German convoys often believed they had finally found safety, only to be ambushed by Beaufighters expertly using the rugged terrain for cover. This unforgiving, cold stretch of water ultimately became a watery graveyard for countless Axis merchant vessels and the men who sailed them. The Beaufighter systematically and relentlessly severed the vital supply lines that were the lifeblood of the entire German war effort across the European continent. The successful operations transformed the North Sea coastline into an untenable operating environment for unescorted or poorly defended Axis shipping. The core of the strike wing's success lay in the tactical specialization known as flak suppression, a brutally dangerous task demanding extraordinary flying skill and immense courage. Flak, the German abbreviation for Fliegerabwehrkanonen, or anti-aircraft artillery, was the single greatest threat to any aircraft attempting a low-level strike against a convoy. The defense was dense, often mounted on specialized flak ships, heavily armed trawlers, and escort destroyers, capable of putting up a shattering wall of explosive fire. Flying directly into this concentrated, high-volume fire was a grim and unavoidable necessity for the Beaufighter pilots, especially those tasked with clearing the way for the primary strike group. They would approach at wave-top height, their 20mm cannons roaring, aiming their devastating stream of fire directly at the exposed gun positions on the enemy decks. This suppressive fire served a dual purpose, being both lethally destructive to the gun crews and powerfully distracting to the remaining defensive positions. It effectively forced the surviving German gunners to abandon their coordinated, aimed fire and simply duck for cover, breaking the defensive pattern of the entire convoy. The flak suppression aircraft's primary objective was not to sink the merchant ships but to ensure the survival and success of the torpedo and rocket aircraft following closely behind. The pilots often referred to this job as riding the flak, a testament to the stomach-churning experience of flying directly through a continuous stream of hot, exploding projectiles. The accompanying element, the torpedo and rocket Beaufighters, would time their final attack runs precisely with the suppression efforts, ensuring a clear path to their targets. The introduction of the high-velocity, armor-piercing rocket projectile further diversified the attack, allowing pilots to inflict serious damage from a slightly safer, longer range. However, the close-in cannon attack remained vital for the final, chaotic, and most destructive phase of the strike, ensuring total target saturation. The dramatic visual spectacle of the coordinated assault, with tracer rounds streaking, flak exploding, and rockets slamming into hulls, was a terrifying masterpiece of military force application. This well-rehearsed tactic ensured that the Beaufighter's concentrated firepower was almost always brought to bear against poorly defended targets, making every pass count. The destruction of the Moselle convoy in the Norwegian fjord stands as one of the most significant and chilling examples of the Beaufighter strike wing's devastating tactical efficiency. This particular convoy was a high-priority, high-value target for the Allied forces, carrying essential materials that were absolutely vital to the German logistical system. Its total destruction proved to be a major strategic blow, signaling a dangerous new vulnerability in the supposedly secure German coastal defense network. The RAF operation was planned with meticulous care, using long-range reconnaissance to precisely pinpoint the convoy's position and to time the strike for maximum surprise and effect. When the Beaufighters suddenly materialized, sweeping in low over the water, the German naval escorts were immediately and completely overwhelmed by the sheer concentration of the attack. The flak suppression element executed its terrifying mission with professional, brutal efficiency, systematically silencing the numerous deck guns on the escort vessels within minutes. This swift action provided a clear and open channel for the follow-on aircraft, which were armed with heavy torpedoes and the newly effective armor-piercing rockets. In the ensuing chaos, multiple large merchant vessels were crippled or sunk almost instantly by the combined, focused impact of both the torpedoes and the rockets. The sheer speed and ferocity of the strike, with the Beaufighters emerging from the smoke and glare to spit cannon fire, was a genuinely terrifying sight for the German sailors. Any attempted interception by patrolling Luftwaffe fighters arrived far too late, finding only a scene of unmitigated destruction and the British aircraft already rapidly withdrawing. The catastrophic loss of the Moselle convoy sent shockwaves throughout the entire German Naval High Command, necessitating an immediate and major reassessment of their anti-shipping defenses. It was an undeniable and bloody demonstration that the Beaufighter was no longer a subject for mockery but a fundamental strategic threat that had to be taken seriously. This single, coordinated action permanently cemented the Beaufighter's fearsome reputation as the single most effective anti-shipping aircraft operating in the European theater. The disaster underscored the terrifying reality that even well-escorted convoys were no longer safe once the British developed a truly effective means to coordinate their attacks. Before achieving its legendary status as a brutal maritime striker, the Beaufighter first forged its combat identity as a critical, high-performance night fighter during the dark days of the Blitz. Its notably large and voluminous fuselage proved to be perfectly suited for housing the bulky, power-hungry, and technically complex early airborne interception radar sets. These early radar units were absolutely essential for locating the waves of incoming enemy bombers that flew under the complete cover of the dense night blackout. The observer, positioned immediately behind the pilot, became the aircraft's specialized radar eye, expertly guiding the pilot toward the invisible German raiders using the soft glow of the radar scope. This technical partnership between the two crewmen was foundational to the Beaufighter's enduring success, transforming it into a uniquely deadly hunter of the nocturnal sky. The already well-established heavy armament, later famous for its anti-shipping role, proved equally devastating when brought to bear against the slower, unarmored airframes of German bombers. A minimal burst from just one of the 20mm cannons was typically more than sufficient to fatally tear apart the structure of a Heinkel or a Dornier. This specialized night fighting role was a grim, solitary, and tense business, often conducted in incredibly poor weather and at high altitudes, far from the dramatic visual combat of the daytime skirmishes. The successful introduction of the Beaufighter significantly and immediately raised the strategic cost for the Luftwaffe to conduct its massive nocturnal bombing campaigns over the United Kingdom. German bomber pilots, who had previously operated with an almost complete sense of impunity under the cloak of darkness, now faced a heavy, fast, and completely invisible adversary. The Beaufighter's powerful twin engines and inherently robust construction also provided a valuable safety margin, making it a stable and reliable platform for fighting in often treacherous nighttime conditions. The aircraft's excellent endurance allowed it to maintain long, consistent patrols, effectively guarding the major population centers throughout the most dangerous hours of darkness. The Beaufighter's profound success in this specialized role was instrumental in forcing the Luftwaffe to abandon the massive, concentrated night bombing raids. Instead, they were forced into conducting less effective, scattered nuisance raids, marking a pivotal and critical turning point in the overall air war over Britain. The Beaufighter's continuous and pragmatic evolution extended its killing capability by successfully integrating the powerful, ship-sinking torpedo into its diverse arsenal. The torpedo, a weapon with the singular power to sink even the largest merchant ships with a single, crushing impact, required an especially brave and exceptionally skilled pilot for its delivery. The required attack profile was incredibly demanding, forcing the pilot to fly perfectly level and absolutely straight at mast height, often directly into the concentrated, explosive fire of the convoy. The aircraft had to be kept absolutely stable at a precise altitude and speed for the heavy torpedo to be successfully released and run true in the water toward the target. This critical period meant several seconds of excruciating vulnerability to enemy fire, a moment where a pilot's training, focus, and raw nerve were tested beyond the absolute limit. The Beaufighter's immense power and famously sturdy frame allowed it to successfully carry the heavy torpedo payload while maintaining a speed fast enough to minimize its exposure during the attack. The combined tactical approach of a heavy cannon attack for instant flak suppression, immediately followed by the silent, crushing impact of a torpedo, proved an irresistible tactical combination. Later, the aircraft was ingeniously modified to carry the devastating RP-3 rocket projectiles, a new weapon that provided a standoff capability, reducing the exposure time compared to the risky torpedo run. However, the powerful psychological impact of a torpedo attack remained a unique advantage, as German crews knew its successful delivery almost certainly condemned their vessel. The aircraft's defining adaptability was its single greatest asset, allowing it to inflict either a crippling, explosive blow from its rockets and cannons or the terminal, deep damage of a torpedo. This tactical versatility made the already complex pre-planning of German convoy defense increasingly difficult and frequently rendered their efforts completely futile. The Beaufighter effectively became a self-contained, multi-role weapon system that could be configured to defeat any type of naval target or defensive arrangement. The legend of the Beaufighter is often rightly associated with the cold, tempestuous waters of the English Channel and the North Sea, yet its service in the brutal Southwest Pacific was equally decisive. The aircraft was extensively flown and depended upon by the Royal Australian Air Force, RAF, which utilized the specially adapted Beaufighter Mark 21 for tropical operations. This variant was specifically engineered to cope with the extreme, corrosive heat and high humidity of the harsh tropical environment in the Pacific. The aircraft became a fundamental, heavy pillar of the entire Allied offensive against Japanese supply lines and isolated, well-entrenched ground positions. The RAF Beaufighters earned the haunting, descriptive nickname Whispering Death from the Japanese for the unusually low-frequency sound of their powerful twin engines on approach. The aircraft quickly established a terrifying and unshakable reputation, becoming a feared enemy of the Japanese forces across the vast region. The concentrated heavy armament, especially the nose-mounted cannons, was devastatingly effective when used for low-level strafing runs against exposed Japanese troops and supply depots. The primary operational role of the RAF Beaufighter was to aggressively cut the critical sea lanes between the Japanese-held islands and to destroy their supply barges and small freighters. The sheer, massive scale of the Japanese island-hopping campaign left their many small supply convoys uniquely vulnerable to the long-range, powerful attacks of the Beaufighter. Operating over the vast, empty ocean expanses, the aircraft's excellent endurance and renowned reliability were absolutely invaluable assets for the long and dangerous missions. The Australian pilots quickly developed highly specialized, extremely low-level attack tactics, often successfully coordinating with United States forces to deliver crippling blows to Japanese naval movements. This specific campaign, while frequently overshadowed by the titanic battles in Europe, was fought with exceptional bravery and had a profoundly decisive impact on the attrition of the Japanese war effort. The Beaufighter truly proved itself to be a genuinely global and versatile warplane, fully capable of executing its mission of destruction with equal, brutal efficiency in any climate. It was an essential element in the successful isolation and ultimate defeat of countless Japanese garrisons across the immense, strategic Pacific theater. The initial, dismissive mockery from the German Luftwaffe's elite fighter pilots eventually and inevitably dissolved, giving way to a professional, grudging, and often fearful respect. This fundamental psychological shift was born directly from the grim, undeniable reality of mounting casualty reports and critical, strategic losses in the North Sea. The confident, arrogant dismissal of the box evaporated entirely as the total tonnage of sunken German merchant shipping rapidly began to accumulate at the bottom of the ocean. Commanders and fighter aces, previously preoccupied with the glory of aerial dogfights, were suddenly and urgently briefed on the catastrophic strategic impact of the Beaufighter strike wings. The German pilots finally realized that the Beaufighter was not designed to be a nimble, elegant dogfighter, but rather a profoundly stable, heavily armored, flying cannon bunker. They began to treat the aircraft with extreme caution, learning the harsh lesson that a direct, head-on attack was a near-suicidal endeavor given its concentrated frontal armament. The official Luftwaffe strategic analysis officially shifted to correctly recognizing the Beaufighter as a specialized, serious, and tactical weapon requiring dedicated and costly defensive measures. Intercepting a coordinated Beaufighter strike wing became an immensely high-risk, dangerous proposition, as the Beaufighters rarely flew alone and were masters of coordinated mutual defense. The few German aces who did manage to successfully shoot one down often spoke of its extraordinary toughness and its alarming ability to withstand massive amounts of concentrated battle damage. This reluctant and professional acknowledgement from their most respected enemies was the ultimate and most profound validation of the Beaufighter's unique design philosophy. It definitively proved that sheer, concentrated firepower and focused, brutal purpose could successfully overcome the pure aerodynamic finesse valued by the German Air Force. The clear evolution of the German perception, from contemptuous ridicule to palpable fear and finally to grudging respect, is a classic, textbook military narrative of fatal underestimation. By the midpoint of the war, the mere sight of the distinctive, heavy silhouette of the Beaufighter was enough to send a professional chill through the most hardened German convoy commander. The Bristol Beaufighter, though it never quite achieved the household fame and universal recognition of the Spitfire or the P-51 Mustang, secured its place in military history as an indispensable weapon. Its profound legacy is solidly built not on records of speed or elegant looks but rather on the sheer, relentless, and professionally inflicted destruction it consistently delivered. The haunting nickname Whispering Death, earned during the campaign in the Pacific, perfectly and chillingly encapsulates its entire operational modus operandi. This was a low, heavy, menacing approach that was often the last auditory sensation a German or Japanese enemy sailor experienced before the massive four-cannon battery opened fire. It pioneered and perfected the strategic concept of the coordinated maritime strike wing, a tactical model that was later adopted and refined by numerous air forces for decades to come. The Beaufighter convincingly proved that a robust, heavy, multi-engine airframe could be successfully adapted from a purely defensive role into a primary, aggressive offensive weapon with lethal results. Its profound design versatility allowed it to flawlessly execute night fighting, long-range reconnaissance, torpedo attack, anti-shipping rocket strikes, and heavy cannon strafing with equal, brutal competence. The aircraft's legendary toughness and remarkable operational reliability also contributed immeasurably to its enduring legacy, enabling countless crews to return safely despite sustaining crippling battle damage. Its subtle but profound influence is clearly visible in the design of many subsequent heavy fighters and dedicated strike aircraft that wisely followed its uncompromising template of concentrated firepower. Ultimately, the Beaufighter was the dependable, unglamorous workhorse that never sought public glory but tirelessly delivered the necessary, continuous blows to dismantle the Axis supply lines. It stands today as a powerful and enduring monument to pragmatic engineering, uncompromising ruggedness, and the extraordinary courage of the crews who turned a mocked utility aircraft into one of the most feared aerial predators of the entire Second World War. The entire operational history of the Beaufighter is a potent, final reminder that concentrated force and relentless, focused purpose often convincingly triumph over fleeting aerodynamic elegance in the brutal arithmetic of modern warfare.